Age of Men is over. The time of the Orc has come.
All right, hello guys. Welcome back to the Goblin King YouTube channel. It's been a while since we uploaded a video. I've been extremely busy, but finally found some time to get back to the channel. And today's video is going to be a follow-up to the first video I did on a book review of A Fellowship of the Ring. This is going to be on The Two Towers. I recently got done finishing it when I was away camping. And we're going to talk about the entire book, what makes The Two Towers so great, some of the things I maybe have minor gripes with, also a little bit of a comparison to the movie and what things The Two Towers book did that the movie did not. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and kind of more of this type of content, we're going to be covering a lot of the Lord of the Rings content. We're going to be covering like a little bit of Star Wars here soon. We're going to be kind of doing an analysis of the Disney Star Wars era. Going to be talking about a little bit about Dune as well. I'm going to be doing a video about the writing style of Dune and some Percy Jackson and also Harry Potter book analysis as well. So again, stay tuned for all of that if you would like to. And let's get into it. So The Two Towers is a book that is very different, in my opinion, from Fellowship, because Two Towers is the first book where you have multiple different stories going on. Fellowship is one complete narrative. It follows the same kind of cast of characters, or we add on characters and then we decrease characters. So when I talked about the idea of Fellowship of the Ring, the main thing that I really harped on, which I really love Fellowship of the Ring. Fellowship of the Ring is my favorite book. The Two Towers, in my opinion, has a harder task. Because, for instance, my favorite book series is A Song of Ice and Fire. It has multiple POVs, you have multiple storylines going on, there's different places in each different POV usually. That's kind of the same idea for The Two Towers, but it's done in a very different way. So the first half of Two Towers follows directly after the events of Fellowship of the Ring. And again, it really feels like it wasn't like two separate books. And like we've talked about, Tolkien really wrote this story as one big book. It wasn't really like all of these broken up pieces. It was one long thing. And you really feel that with how Two Towers starts. It picks up with what happens with Aragorn and the rest of the Fellowship during the events of Frodo leaving, what all happens there. And this is where we see Boromir's death. We see Boromir's kind of funeral. All of that type stuff happens at the very beginning of this book. So it kind of kicks it off to a really nice start. And it really picks up on the events of what happens in Fellowship, so it feels very connected. Now, I like this idea, right, that we're bringing all this in. I do think Boromir's stuff and the conclusion of Boromir's arc should have been in Fellowship. I know the movie did a great job of doing that. I think that makes more sense, just concluding that. But again, I understand why Tolkien left it for this book specifically. Now, the first half it's kind of its own plot line, and then we have the back half being another plot line. And this is something I'm going to get into that kind of, in my opinion, hurts the pacing of Two Towers. Because the main focus here is we have Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Merry, and Pippin. Those five are on their one side of the story, and then we have Frodo and Sam on the other side. And what works and doesn't work here is you see most of your action set pieces, most of the highest moments happening within the first half, and the second half is a weird thing because it kind of slows the pacing down. You're kind of restarting a story because you're picking up going back kind of to when Frodo and Sam leave the Fellowship, and you're going off of what they've been doing now. So in that regard, I do think the pacing compared to the first book takes a massive hit. I don't think it's nearly a big problem or anything. I do think it's a minor gripe for me that I think the story would have worked better if Tolkien had spliced it up. Whereas Two Towers, the movie, in my opinion, does a much better job of splicing in Frodo's and Sam's story, Merry and Pippin's story, in between the Legolas, Aragorn, and Gimli stuff as a whole. It makes it a little bit easier to digest. And then when you get to scenes like Helm's Deep, you're able to take in what's going on at that battle easier when you kind of get a slower scene where you have maybe Merry and Pippin trying to convince the Ents to attack, and that's done completely different in the books. But let's talk about something else that I really like about this book, is that, again, we see Legolas, Aragorn, and Gimli searching. They have to basically conclude what happens. They're basically trying to figure out what Frodo and Sam ended up doing. They kind of come to the right conclusion, and they choose to follow the Uruk-hai. That's kind of the massive, like, first part of the plot for probably the first, maybe, we'll say third of the book, or I guess maybe the first half of, I guess it's really more the first quarter. Let's say the first quarter of the book focuses on this idea of hunting down Merry and Pippin and the Uruk-hai. And we see Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, and they're crossing, looking for them and hunting them down and going into Rohan. And then we'll kind of get a flip. We'll see Merry and Pippin's side of the story, where they're traveling with the Uruk-hai. It's mainly through Pippin's POV. And all of this worked really, really well. I think as a story, like the first part of the story, the first half, the pacing is pretty good, because we do see a lot of things that are really interesting. And one thing I think is very interesting is the way we're subtly foreshadowed that Gandalf is still alive, that he has come back and is changed into something. And for a while, as readers, again, this is done really well in the movies as well, is the idea that, is this Saruman? And we find out that it's not Saruman. But one of the interesting points is when we see Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli outside of Fangorn Forest, and we see something like Saruman. Is it a projection of Saruman? It's not actually Saruman. It's a kind of a mystery that we're left to kind of think about, of the idea, was Saruman actually next to Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli? Because Gandalf says it was not him. We have a lot of that going on, and we see how Rohan's culture as well is something that's very much developed here in this portion of the story. And again, I really like the way Tolkien does this. Tolkien continues really investing you in the story. He does such a great job, and it's continued in this second book of exploring what's going on in the world, exploring these different cultures, exploring what does the country look like. One of the things he does a great job exploring that we're really going to look into when we get to the Frodo and Sam portion of the story is the Emyn Wheel. He really does a great job of showing you, and even in Frodo and Sam's journey, I think way more than Frodo, Legolas, and Gimli's story, is really showing the environment and really setting the stage for what is going on and what these characters are traveling through, because the environment is such a big aspect of the story. It creates some of the natural issues of how do Frodo and Sam get to Mordor. That continues when you get to things like the mountains and things surrounding Mordor. So again, getting back to Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, their story really leads them to Fangorn Forest, tracking down Merry and Pippin. And there's, for a while, I mean, through their heads, hope, and there's no hope that they're even alive. And eventually, they meet Gandalf. So Gandalf reappears back into the story, and I am someone that, it's weird, because I kind of wish Gandalf had stayed dead. I know that wasn't Tolkien's purpose with that character in the story, but I do think it makes the story more compelling when you don't have that leadership character now. It was something I really liked about Fellowship of the Ring, the way it had such an impact on what was the Fellowship going to do moving forward, what was the plan. Aragorn having to take this kind of leadership role, which he kind of already has. He's a vastly different character in the books than he is in the movies. And the movies, he's this character that is kind of unwilling to become the king, to become this character that is King of Gondor, and he is someone that kind of shies away from that role. In the books, he doesn't shy away from that at all. He is very much taking up his role. He's been walking around with Anduril for so long, and it's now fully forged. He is someone that's very protective of his sword, as well as we'll see that when they get to Rohan and Edoras specifically, when they're basically saying, you know, no weapons are allowed in the hall. Aragorn doesn't take kindly to that. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. So they meet Gandalf, they kind of figure out what's going on there, and they figure out that, oh, he kind of did die, and then he comes back, and he's sent back because he has a new purpose. He's now Gandalf the White. He's no longer Gandalf the Grey. He is what Saruman should have been, and a lot of this book focuses on the idea of what Saruman should have been, what Saruman has become. Saruman has kind of slipped into the industry world and destroying the natural beauty of the world. He's become greedy. He's become power hungry. And we see that Saruman's plan has already failed, even though he doesn't think it has. Even if Saruman was to destroy Rohan and beat them down, Saruman has still already kind of lost the war. The ring is out of his control. Frodo and Sam have slipped his net. He is now closer to Sauron than Saruman. It's a very compelling story. We see how Saruman works his magic, how he has Grima Wormtongue poisoning Theoden. And something that I think is very interesting with the character of Theoden is Theoden in the movies is kind of shown as kind of being like a zombie type character in the movies, whereas in the book he's not that. It's more like he's way more open and prone to suggestion, and Grima does have that control over him. But it's something that we see two vastly different characters. I made a video on this channel that Theoden in the book and the movie are two very different characters. Theoden is someone that is Theoden is someone that is really heroic. He is someone that Aragorn can really look up to, and that's kind of partially the same in the movie, but not to this degree that it is in the book, where Theoden is a leader. He is someone that is not going to back down to the threat of Saruman. When we see the whole idea of what are the Rohirrim going to do, what is Theoden going to do, Theoden's idea is to, yes, ride out and meet Isengard. They were going to, again, reinforce the Fords of Isen, which Rohan was holding at this point. But by the time that they're, on their way and getting there, the Fords of Isen have been broken. And now, really, it only makes sense that they would go to Rohan. That's where the remaining Rohirrim forces are, and out of the ones that aren't scattered all about. And it's something that I think really sets up who Theoden is in the Rohirrim really, really well. Now, one thing I will say that I understand why the books and Two Towers and Tolkien didn't do it, but I do feel like the Battle of Helm's Deep in the book is so much quicker. It feels like the battle is so much faster, and it does have a lot of weight to it. The building to it is great. What we do get on the Helm's Deep battle is fantastic. Now, what I will say, and it's something I really like that the movie did compared to the book, is the movie really drew out Helm's Deep. We see Helm's Deep from really an entire battle perspective. It's not really like we're in only Aragorn's POV looking through the battle. We see in the movie the battle from everyone's eye. We know everything that's going on in each section of the battle, whether that be at the gate, whether that be at the Deeping Wall, whether that's when they're retreating. I like the way Peter Jackson formulated this battle onto the screen. And when you also splice in this, and this is probably why, again, in the books, this wasn't done, is because in the book, you don't want to overwhelm your reader with a ton of action, with a ton of battle for pages and pages and pages and pages. Because the way Tolkien formulated the chapter is there wasn't really anywhere to splice into, oh, we cut to Merry and Pippin, or we cut to this or that. So I really love the way Tolkien, when he did the movies, he took this idea of Helm's Deep, expanded on it. We really see everything going on in the battle all at once, while we're also getting moments where we can reflect on what we're seeing. That, I think, is very impactful. I think that is some of the best decisions that Peter Jackson made when changing, or not really changing, but giving us more perspective into this battle. I think was really awesome. But again, I think when we get to the Battle of Helm's Deep, it's a good lead up to it. But one thing I will say, and this is the major difference between the Two Towers book and movie. The Two Towers movie focused a lot more on building up the battle, building up the stakes, building up everything for Helm's Deep in the movie. Whereas Tolkien, I think that was part of it, yes. But Tolkien as well was kind of trying to show that this was only a minor thing. The real stakes are in the Frodo and Sam stuff. We get way more of Frodo and Sam in the book in Two Towers than we do the movie. Because again, when we get to the end of the movie, we're kind of very far behind the book. The book, Frodo and Sam, they've gone through Shelob's lair. Frodo has been captured. Sam is on the hunt. He has the ring now. He's on his own. We've already gotten to that entire plot already. So it shows the way that the movies and Peter Jackson put much more emphasis on building up the battle. Because scenes that we see in the movies, like, say, all of this stuff with Aragorn and Legolas and how they're like, we don't have enough men and this is hopeless, all that stuff. Don't really see that in the book. The book is something where it kind of happens very quickly, right? So we get the flight to the Fords of Isen. They, notice that the battle's already over and all that. Gandalf kind of goes looking for all of these forces, trying to bring back the forces of the Rohirrim. And they go to Helm's Deep. And within, a couple pages, we get a good layout when they're getting there of what Helm's Deep is, but it's not nearly focused on as much as it is in the movies. There's also no warg attack, which again, I don't think the books needed. The books didn't need a warg attack. When you look at the way the movies did it, it makes a lot of sense to have a warg attack because, again, when you look at the movie does not start with Amon Hen, with Boromir dying, all that. That's at the end of Fellowship. So when you start it, there's not really a lot of action in the beginning of the movie, beginning of the books. Either way, we do see the Rohirrim taking out the Isengard forces with Merry and Pippin. But there's not really a lot of action when it comes to the book. But the thing the book gets away with is that the book has good pacing to start off with Boromir stuff, and then Helm's Deep stuff. It's not that far away like it is, say, in the movies. And the book was fine with that. It didn't need any other action in between that. We were fine. Whereas the movies did need that. When you have Helm's Deep at the very end of the movie, you have no real action at the beginning because that was done at the beginning or at the end of the last movie. I thought a warg attack thing made sense for the movies, whereas the book, it didn't really need to happen. It also didn't really make sense to do that in the book, just given the different points being made and what's going on books to movie. So that, I think, did make sense for the movies, but did not make sense for the books. So it kind of leads us to this big battle at Helm's Deep, and we see that Rohan wins. It's kind of similar to the books or the movies outside of the idea that there are no elves. That part, I really don't think made sense personally. Like, the elves kind of have their own stuff going on, and it's something I didn't really like about the movies when I figured that out with the books, that there were no elves there. Because, for one, in the movies, it kind of takes away this idea of, like, well, what is everybody doing? Right? If these elves can come all the way from Lorien down to Helm's Deep, are they not being besieged? Are they not preparing for war? Or is this just an attack on men? Because in the book, it's a completely different circumstance. There are reasons that all of these forces can't combine. That was Sauron's plan. Sauron's plan is to isolate all these pockets of the free people so that they cannot join together like they did the last time Sauron rose to power and was defeated. And we see that in the book. It's not something that's hugely expanded upon in Lord of the Rings, but it's something that is made very apparent. And there's even this scene that we see in the movies where it's like Faramir showing that Rohan is besieged by Isengard and we're kind of being besieged by Mordor. There was no real reference to any other places on Middle-earth, which is something I thought was a missed opportunity. But as we go with the books again, we get through this battle at Helm's Deep. Rohan wins. We see the Uruk-hai forces are destroyed with the help of the Ents. And something that's, again, vastly different is that we actually don't witness Isengard being destroyed. We're actually kind of told from a story with Pippin and Merry once our good characters from Rohan, Theoden, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Gandalf, all are going to Isengard. It's kind of a surprise. When we get to Isengard, we're expecting Saruman, all these forces to still be there, but we arrive and the gates are broken. Pippin and Merry are standing above it. Now, we do know right before that Pippin and Merry and the Ents were going to war. That's kind of how their storyline ends until after Helm's Deep. And we see that Isengard has fallen. And we're told this through a story with Pippin and Merry, which I think does work. It also adds to kind of the weight of after Helm's Deep. Like, yes, we did, we did defeat this force, but at the same time, we still have Isengard to defeat. We still have Saruman to defeat, who are all big issues. So how are we going to do that? And we see through a story and the retelling that Merry and Pippin and the Ents, they flooded Isengard, they broke down the gates, and that Saruman is trapped within Isengard, or Orthanc. And what I think is really interesting, that's another thing that the movies, because this is something that happens in Return of the King, it's something that gets pushed down the line a little bit. It's also some deleted scenes that I really, I thought should have probably been in the movie, is that Saruman is a character that is much more expanded upon in the books, especially when you look at kind of the end of the series where Saruman ends up going to the Shire. is that Saruman is this person that uses his voice. He sways people with his voice. It makes you really understand how, for instance, the Wildmen come to Saruman's force because of the way he's able to persuade people, because of the way he's able to twist people. It also gives you a really good indication as to why all of these characters, like at the White Council, don't really go against Saruman. How Saruman was able to stay in the shadows for so long because of his voice. It's something that I really love that Tolkien does with Saruman's character. It's one of the reasons Saruman is one of my favorite characters in all of Lord of the Rings. He's so fascinating to me, and that's one of the biggest reasons why. But we see now that Saruman's power is not even close to Gandalf's anymore. Gandalf's power has overwhelmed Saruman, and even Saruman's voice is not working as near as it used to be. Right? Theoden is able to stand up to Saruman's power. Even when you see some of the Rohirrim seem to start being swayed by Saruman, Theoden's will overtakes it. And we see this whole thing where they basically leave. Saruman is left at the tower, and that's where we leave the Isengard plot. And we also get this idea again that the Seeing Stone is thrown out of the tower by Grima. Saruman's probably pissed off about that. And Pippin does take an interest in it. Again, very similar to the way we see that happen in the movies. It's a bit different because it's the idea that Rohan is basically going back to Edoras, and then Pippin gets it, and then we see all these stuff happen. Gandalf and Pippin set off for Minas Tirith by the midpoint of Two Towers. So that is kind of where that plot ends off. I think it's really well written. I think there's good things from the movie, good things from the books. And I think there's some things that I'm like, on both. I think the books definitely did everything better, in my opinion. But I like the way Peter Jackson adapted these movies, or these books, and did a really great job of building upon them. Making them more digestible, I think, is something I really liked what Peter Jackson did with this book specifically. And that gets us to Frodo and Sam. And the biggest issue for Frodo and Sam is they're now without Aragorn. They're now without Gandalf. How do they navigate this world that none of them have ever been to? That they've only really been, in the Shire and around there, and now they've had this journey to Rivendell and through the mines and now to the Emyn Muil. They don't know how to navigate it. It's a tough situation, and they're struggling, right? Another thing we see is they're going to have food issues, right? How much food are they going to have? And I think Frodo and Sam have a really great arc in this book, where it's nowhere near like how I see they did with the movie, where it's this idea that Frodo is definitely being corrupted. It doesn't seem like that in the book. It kind of seems like, yes, Frodo is falling under this power and weight of the ring. But he also sees other things, right? Where he sees what Smeagol is and all of those ideas. And what I think is interesting is the way that Sam kind of realizes that. But like at the beginning of this book, and Sam is someone that is Sam is someone that doesn't really like Smeagol or Gollum, and he has every right to. He kind of sees the negative side. It's that balance where Frodo sees himself and sees the good in Smeagol and or Gollum, but he doesn't fully trust him, right? Frodo is a very wise character. Something that is kind of missed in the movies is that Frodo is older than Sam, Merry, and Pippin. He is more wise, and all that, and it very much comes off like that in the books as well. And so Frodo sees that good in Smeagol and doesn't want to go to what Smeagol eventually will become. But Sam sees the opposite. Sam sees the treacherous side, the Gollum side, and he sees all of these things, and it makes a very interesting character dynamic, a very interesting character in Smeagol/Gollum, where we see him as this character who's been stalking the Fellowship, something that was really well written. And we see as Frodo and Sam eventually capture him. And this is where we see this major dynamic shift with Frodo and Sam. How do they go about treating Smeagol and Gollum? And it's this idea that the ring is something that is treacherous, right? Swearing on the ring is something that will keep Gollum/Smeagol to his word. And it's something where we see very much a dynamic shift. We see that Smeagol tries to help them and is very nice to them, even with Sam having his remarks. And we know that Smeagol is still planning something. We know that. But at the same time, what is Smeagol or Gollum supposed to do in this moment? He doesn't want Sauron to get the ring. He wants the ring for himself, but he's also made this oath to basically help his master and Frodo. Well, how is he supposed to do that? Because what Frodo is asking Gollum to do is get them into Mordor. Well, there's only two real ways to do that. One is through the Black Gate, which Gollum knows is impossible, and the other option is to go through this path. That's much easier to do than, say, the Black Gate. It's much more accessible, even going against Shelob, right? But it's one of these weird ideas where Gollum is right to show them that way, but it's like a double-edged sword, right? The Smeagol side is saying yes, because this is the best way to get into Mordor, which is what the Master wants. But the Gollum side of it is saying, well, you should also betray them and take the ring for yourself. So again, it accomplishes both sides of his personality. And we see that there's this fight in Smeagol and Gollum the entire time that this is going on. And what I think is amazing is the way that one side eventually wins. When we see that eventually Frodo and Sam and Gollum, they've made it through the Emyn Muil, they've made it through the Dead Marshes, they reach the Black Gate, and they realize this is impossible. We're never going to be able to get in there. But all of the time, right, when we see our forces with Aragorn and all that, with the Isengard threat, we're seeing the real threat through Frodo and Sam's eyes. That's something that Tolkien really paints here. That yes, it's great that we've had this great victory in the West over Isengard, but we haven't seen anything yet. This is the true evil of Middle-earth. That was really just the opening act. This is what's the real act is going to be. We see the Easternlings. We see Mordor, how defensible it is, and the eerie and dark feeling as they get closer to the mountains of Mordor. It's great writing by Tolkien. It's something that I think makes sense when you look at the idea of why did Tolkien split up these two parts? And it makes sense from a story point of view to wrap up one side of the story to lead to what the next big bad's going to be in Return of the King. It makes sense from that point of view. Either way, I still like it better the way the movies splice these in between in each story. I think the story works better if like Helm's Deep is at the end. But that's how Tolkien wanted to do it, so that's the way he did it. And it kind of culminates to this idea where they're finally getting into Ithilien, and they're captured. We'll say captured. They weren't really captured by Faramir and Gondor. It was more like the area was just very unsafe, so Faramir takes them with him, and also has questions for them, like, why are they here? Why are hobbits here? It's the same idea as Rohan, right? Rohan is like, or specifically Éomer with Rohan is like, why are you walking around our lands with an elf, a dwarf? Why are you here? This descendant of Isildur, why are you here? It's very suspicious. And when you look at the idea that Isengard is this growing threat in this land, and you even look at Ithilien, right, with Mordor being so close, of course Faramir needs to be cautious with these. And this is the biggest mistake that I think the movies did. Of all the things that Peter Jackson did, I think the portrayal of Faramir in the movies is just awful. They tried to make Faramir this character that is, again, very similar to Boromir. But he also does have that strength to resist the ring. And to a degree, when you're looking at it from a very broad aspect, that is kind of true. Like, Faramir is like Boromir to some degrees, but he's also very different. Faramir is someone that is much more like Aragorn than, say, a character like Boromir. Faramir is a character that is, by all accounts, compared to someone like Gandalf, who is extremely wise, someone that seems noble, of great birth. And again, we're told this, and Faramir is someone that, there's a very iconic line that's always quoted of like Faramir saying he does not love the sword, he does not like the bow, for all the things that they do, it's for the things that they kind of protect. And that's a fantastic quote to really look into Faramir as a character. And Faramir is this person that, when he finds out what happens to Boromir and all of these things, he's someone that completely understands, right? He's not someone that's tempted by the ring. Frodo and Sam never go to Osgiliath. That's a completely different thing that happens in the movie. That it seems like it's there to kind of fill time, in my opinion. When you look at what Peter Jackson was trying to do to save the Shelob stuff, it kind of does feel like, to a degree, it was a bit just, they spread it out. And I don't hate the decision, right? I hate the way that they chose to go with Faramir's character, because I thought with the Frodo and Sam plot, my favorite part of that back half was the Faramir stuff. I think Faramir is an extremely interesting character. And when I haven't really read Lord of the Rings in probably a couple years, going back and revisiting Faramir as a character, he's just a fantastic character. He's definitely one of Tolkien's best. I wish, Peter Jackson's movies would have represented that a bit better, but that all happens. So we see all this happen, and this is when we kind of get to the big, in Gollum's eyes, the big betrayal. Because Frodo, yes, we see from Frodo's ideas that he's trying to save Gollum, Smeagol's life, but at the same time, he is tricking Gollum. Frodo tells Gollum to trust him, and Gollum does, and he gets kidnapped, more or less. He gets threatened harshly by Faramir. It's this moment that, from Frodo's point of view, is the good action. He is preventing Gollum once again from being killed. He is pitying Gollum. But this is where our main real switch happens, where the Gollum side finally wins, where it's not about helping the Master anymore. It's about getting the ring back. It's about doing what's in his self-interest. It's kind of this idea that we see very much through Tolkien's writing of greed and the idea of selfishness. And that's kind of portrayed in the Gollum side of Smeagol. And I think this is a great moment to do it, because it's everything, it's within Frodo's character, but it also gives us a massive twist that works really well for Gollum's character as well. So we finally figure out where we're going. And Faramir does say, I would not advise it. But again, Frodo is very intelligent. He understands this isn't this idea where in the movie, it kind of feels like Frodo doesn't know what he's getting into. It's kind of the way it feels like in the movie. Like, he knows, yes, he's going towards danger, but Frodo notes this. There's no other way into Mordor that he knows or that anyone else has told him except what Gollum has told him. This is the way they have to go, regardless of if it's a trap or not. And even Frodo thinks that, yes, there probably is a trap. Or there is something that probably is going to happen, that Gollum will switch on us. And Frodo even notes the closer they get to Mount Doom, the more likely it is that he will flip on them. Frodo is not a stupid character. Frodo is not someone that is illogical. That's something that I think the movies didn't do justice for Frodo on. I noted this kind of in the Fellowship of the Ring video I did as well, that Frodo is a character that is extremely brave, but he's also extremely intelligent. When you look at things like the Barrow Downs, which were not included in the Fellowship of the Ring movie, it really shows how strong-willed Frodo can be and is. And they finally are setting off towards Mordor, and this is made apparent. The mood is heavily switched. It's this one thing that Tolkien does really well when you talk at pacing, is that we kind of have been leaning towards this path that's been growing darker and darker and darker. We get a little bit of light, right? We're with the Men of Gondor. We feel safer a little bit, right? There's still an eerie feeling, and there's still that intensity, kind of the same as like Tom Bombadil in Fellowship of the Ring, where we've been this growing uneasiness, and then we have a kind of a rest period where we're able to kind of reflect on what's been happening. But we also have that eerie feeling that we're going to have to leave at some point. That's the exact feeling we kind of feel with Faramir and Gondor. And then we go further into Mordor. And we even see in this book, this doesn't happen in the third book, we see in this book the Witch King and his army as they are leaving Minas Morgul. And as Frodo and Sam are going up the stair into Shelob's lair. And this part of the story is massively different than the movie counterpart, where Frodo and Sam go in together, right? Smeagol is leading them in, and eventually they get separated. Smeagol isn't saying anything. Everything feels off. And Frodo and Sam eventually remember that they have this vial that produces light. As they go in, all hell breaks loose. They find Shelob is within. They do a bit of fighting on Shelob. And eventually we get to this point that's, again, vastly different than the movies, where the two get split up. Frodo starts running for, he sees the exit. And at the same time, Sam sees Gollum behind. And the two get split up. Sam and Gollum are fighting, and Gollum realizes he can't beat Sam and escapes. Whereas Frodo is stung, and it appears he's dead. And this is a big moment at the very end of the book where we're sitting here questioning, is Frodo dead? Is this what it all came to? Frodo's pity of Smeagol or Gollum is the reason he dies? Will Sam be alone now, carrying on the quest? And by the end of the book, we find out that isn't the case, right? That Frodo is alive still, and that Sam is going to have to defeat all of these orcs to save his master. He now has the ring acquired as well, so everything relies now on Sam. And one thing that I think is interesting is that if I was writing the story, I actually think in this book, I would have left it open to interpretation that Frodo was dead. I think that would have been interesting, where if Tolkien had actually left off the part where Frodo seems like he's dead, he's in Sam's arms, Sam is taking on the quest, and that would have been the end of it, I think would have been a really cool ending. But I also understand why Tolkien did this way as well. I think it's very good as well. This book has a very strong ending, as we see Sam getting ready to basically take on almost an entire lookout area where there are hundreds of orcs. How will Sam get through this? It seems an impossible task. And yes, we've made it into Mordor finally, but nothing is easier. Everything has gotten harder. Frodo is in immediate danger now. It is a tough road. We also see in this portion that Sam takes on Shelob, giving Shelob multiple injuries. We're never sure what happens to Shelob. My idea would probably be that Shelob died out of her injuries, that she was probably too weak to find more food, because who would have been going in those passages now that the orcs were cleared out? I would assume that Shelob probably died, but we're never given the complete and concrete answer on that idea. And that kind of gets us to the end of the book, and it sets us up for a very strong open as we go into Return of the King with Gandalf and Pippin on the way to Minas Tirith. What will Rohan do? We see Sam and his journey. It's a really strong book. And Two Towers, I think, is always the book that is almost forgotten in a way. It's weird to say that because of how popular the series is, how great the series is, because it's the middle book. It's the book that has to get everything going. It has to set everything else up in motion. And Two Towers of the three books is my least favorite. And by least favorite, I mean I still love this book. It's still a top 10 book for me. But of the three, I do prefer the other two. And this book does a great job to me of setting up the third book, of paying off things that happened in the first book. It's a fantastic book. I have minor gripes with it here and there, but I still think it's a fantastic book. And yeah, that is my review of The Two Towers. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed being back on the channel. Nice long video for you guys as well. We're going to be, again, doing some more reviews, hopefully, in the coming days and or weeks. I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.